New cars in 2026 cost way too much money, but this vehicle right here is actually one of a few models you can still get for under $25,000. In fact, this model starts at $21,600. And for a brand new car in 2026, $21,600 for this is kind of impressive. In fact, I actually probably should introduce what this car actually is. This is the 2026 Chevrolet Trax. Now, this exact trim level doesn't start that cheap, but the base LS version starts at $21,600. And compared to its competitors, this is a lot bigger, a lot more spacious on the interior, has a way nicer yet very interesting engine, and a fairly value-packed interior. Today, I'm gonna take you on a tour of this one, show you some of its features and oddities. I'm gonna take it on a drive and let you guys know what my thoughts are on GM's cheapest new vehicle in the United States. Let's pull the 2026 Chevy Trax into the studio and show you guys around. Let's start the review up front on the 2026 Chevrolet Trax. Starting up front with the front end styling on the 2026 Chevrolet Trax. Now this model is the active trim, which means the front end is gonna be a little bit different from the other trim levels, but this one in particular does have nice chrome inserts right here, and some gloss black plastic. The RS trims of the Trax, the 1RS and the 2RS, do have gloss black front ends as well. You also do have the LS and the LT, which have the same design as those RS trims, but different trimmings. You do have a blacked out Chevy bow tie. This is standard on the active trims and both RS trims. You have your LED daytime running light. This is standard on the LT. The 2RS in the active, the lower two trim levels, so that's LS and 1RS, have an incandescent turn signal and running light up here. And down there, you have your incandescent turn signal on the higher trims and your LED headlights, which are standard across the board. They do have automatic high beams, but they do not have matrix LED technology, which makes a ton of sense since this is such a cost-effective vehicle. You have some nice body color trim right here, and this one is painted in cacti green. When I talk about the trim levels and pricing, I will walk you through the color options on the Trax. Right here, you have your front license plate bracket. You have some matte plastics down here, so when it scrapes, it won't damage the lower front fascia. And that's pretty much it. It's a fairly stylish front end, but it is fairly basic, and it fits the design of the car really well, and it definitely fits Chevy's overall design language that they've moved toward in the past couple of years. Let's move under the hood. Popping the hood on the 2026 Trax will reveal a pretty interesting thing about it, its engine. Now, there is just a typical hood latch inside the car. The headlights are on, so it's gonna beep a little bit. Pull it once and it will pop, and you obviously do have that secondary latch. And under this hood, you will find a 1.2 liter 3-cylinder, which is actually really interesting because most vehicles in this class have roughly a 2 liter 4-cylinder. This is a 1.2 turbocharged 3-pot. Let's move in a little closer and talk about the powertrain specs. Under the hood in the 2026 Chevy Trax, you will find the 1.2 liter ECOTEC. Like I mentioned, it's a 1.2 liter dual overhead cam, 12 valve, inline 3-cylinder, makes about 137 horsepower at 5,000 RPM and 162 pound-feet of torque at 2,500 RPM, thanks to the turbochargers. So this will have a lot more torque at the low end compared to a naturally aspirated engine of the same size. And this engine does have a 75 by 90.5 millimeter bore and stroke, so it is very much undersquared for efficiency. It does not have variable valve lift, but it does have variable valve timing, so it doesn't have VTEC per se. It doesn't change in tone when you floor it all the way, but it will advance the ignition timing to improve performance. This does use a wet timing belt, not a timing chain, so you do have to change it every 100,000 miles or so to help make sure that the engine doesn't destroy itself. I don't know why they used a timing belt on this particular engine, because this car's sibling, the Chevy Trailblazer, is offered with the 1.3 liter EcoTech, which is also a 3-cylinder, and that engine does have a timing chain, but this one does not. This one's a wet timing belt, like I mentioned, but as long as you change the belt, it shouldn't matter too much. And the fact that it is a wet belt, in theory, improves longevity, but I haven't actually seen any scenario where that is true versus a dry timing belt. This engine is all aluminum in construction, so the block and head are aluminum. However, the valve cover and the intake manifold are plastic, and this does require a minimum of 87 octane gasoline. You can put premium in it, but it's not gonna give you any more power. It would be nice if they offered that to maybe closer to 150 horsepower on premium, just to make this a little bit quicker, as 0 to 60 is in the high 8s, low 9s. So it's not the fastest thing in the world, but considering the size of the car and the amount of horsepower it's working with, a 9-second 0 to 60 is not that bad. Other things to note under the hood: this engine is mated to the 6T40 6-speed automatic transmission, unlike a lot of its competitors, which use CVT transmissions, which means you don't have that rubber bandy feel when you hit the gas. It does actually shift like a typical automatic because it is a typical automatic. And if you're worried about CVT long longevity, take a look at the Chevy Trax because unlike a lot of its competitors, this does not have a CVT transmission. But unlike a lot of those competitors, this is not offered with all-wheel drive. It is front-wheel drive only, has an open-style differential, so this is not going to be a good off-road pick. It'll handle, of course, the simple gravel road and stuff like that just fine, but if you need all-wheel drive, it might be worth looking at the Chevy Trailblazer, this car's sibling, which is actually a little bit smaller than this, but it is offered with all-wheel drive and a little bit more power. Other than that, under here, there's not much else to look at. You do have, of course, your brake fluid reservoir, your coolant bottle, your washer fluid fill. This engine does take 0W20 oil, so it's not the thinnest oil on the market, but it is also not very thick either. It's pretty watery. You do have your 12-volt battery, your fuse box, and not much else. It's pretty simple under here. There's a decent amount of working room. The turbocharger is easy to get to back there. And overall, this engine bay is actually pretty interesting considering that no other vehicle other than the Trailblazer in this segment uses a 3-cylinder. And it's kind of cool because this thing actually sounds pretty cool. Let's take a listen to the exhaust note. This engine does kind of sound like a baby V6. I guess it makes sense because it basically is half of a V6. And it has a little bit more of like a rumble to it compared to a 4-cylinder, which is a little bit more grainy. And this engine means that when you're accelerating onto the highway, even when you're flooring it, the engine is not super loud, unlike in a lot of other cars at this price point. So that is really nice to see. This engine is nice and refined, and it is fairly comfortable and fuel efficient. This gets about 28 miles a gallon in the city and 32 on the highway. And considering how big the Trax is compared to some of its competitors in the compact crossover segment, this is actually pretty efficient. Let's move down to the tires and wheels and talk about the suspension setup. Up front on the 2026 Chevy Trax, you have a 225/55 R18 Goodyear Assurance wrapped around this gloss black 18-inch alloy wheel on the active trim. On the base LS and the LT, you have a 17-inch wheel. The LS trim, I believe, is a steely with hubcaps, and the LT has an alloy, but they're both still 17-inch rims. They're the same width at 225 millimeters, but they are a 60 aspect ratio. The 1RS trim has the same wheel size as this, although the design is different. But the 2RS trim has a 19-inch alloy wheel with a 245/45 R19 tire, so it's gonna be a lot wider than this, about 20 millimeters wider, and a lower profile sidewall, which means that thing should actually be pretty good in the handling department. And even this active trim with the slightly narrower tire, still fairly wide for the weight of the car, I might add, still handles quite well. Up here you do have a 300 millimeter rotor, roughly 11.5 inches, and a single piston floating caliper. The suspension up front is a McPherson strut design, and it is fairly comfortable. Let's move to the rear. And in the rear of the 2026 Trax, you do have the exact same tire and wheel as up front, so you can do tire rotations. The rear rotor is a 268 millimeter or 11.5 inch rotor with another single piston floating caliper. However, this rotor is not ventilated unlike the front. It is just a single solid disc. And I would do a braking test, but this is my grandparents' car and I really don't want to warp the rotors on my grandma's car. I wouldn't care if it was a rental, but I would rather not do a braking test on this particular example. I will put a braking statistic up on screen so you guys can compare it, but the brakes do work fairly well, and the brake pedal is pretty touchy on this car, so the brakes should work pretty well. I'm not gonna try them myself, but you get the point. The suspension back here is a torsion beam setup like a lot of other cost-effective vehicles. The Chevy Bolt has a torsion beam. A lot of small compact sedans like Hyundai Elantra and Kia K4 have a torsion beam rear end, and it's a semi-independent setup. It uses like a stamped steel lower control arm, and it's kind of a connected setup. It's not like a solid axle, but it's not completely independent. The benefits of it are that it's fairly cheap and it gets very high payload capacity and it saves a lot of space on the interior. However, it is not the most comfortable, but for a cost-effective vehicle, it works perfectly fine, and a lot of cheaper options have a torsion beam rear end. Now let's talk about the sizing of the Trax, and surprisingly, this vehicle is quite large. Now, you might look at it and be like, that's not a large vehicle, but if you compare it to its its competition? It kinda is. The Chevy Trailblazer is 5 inches shorter than this Trax. The Nissan Kicks is around 10 inches shorter, and the Hyundai Venue, which is the cheapest new car you can buy in the United States as of now, which also competes with this, is nearly 20 inches shorter than the Trax. So this is actually one of the largest options in its segment, and if you care about cargo volume, this is going to be the car to look at. Let's talk about the actual size figures of this vehicle. Your wheelbase is 106.3 inches, your total length is 178.6 inches, your overall width is 71.8 inches without the mirrors. Chevy doesn't actually say what the width is with the mirrors, but it's roughly 82 inches. Your overall height is 61.4 inches with the roof rails, but not including the antenna. Your ground clearance is 7.3 inches, which is a little bit higher off the ground than the Hyundai Venue, but is closer to the ground than the Chevy Trailblazer. The weight of this particular active trim level is 3,036 pounds, and the payload is a surprisingly good 1,109 pounds. And if you get a base model, you're gonna have more payload because the car weighs less. So this is not that heavy, but it is fairly large and spacious, and the payload is good. So if you carry a lot of people and a lot of crap in your car, this is gonna be the best option in the compact SUV segment. And before we move inside, do you wanna know a fun fact about this car? Well, obviously GM is an American manufacturer, but this particular vehicle is actually built in South Korea, which is pretty interesting because Daewoo was a South Korean brand, and when GM bought Daewoo, they also bought their production facility in South Korea. So the Trax is actually one of 2 models, I believe, this and the Buick Envista, that is built in South Korea. So that is pretty nice, and that actually gives me a sense of quality. The South Koreans can build a pretty good car because a lot of the Hyundais that people have seen been having issues, those were built in Georgia, not in South Korea. The Korean-built Hyundai and Kia stuff is actually pretty good, and that gives me high hopes for the Chevy Trax. Before we hop inside the 2026 Trax, let's talk about the locks and keys. Now, all Traxes do have a key fob, of course. You can lock and unlock the door from the key fob, and you can remote start across the board on every trim from the key fob, except on the LS base model where remote start is an option. Same thing goes for passive/keyless entry. These little buttons to lock and unlock the door, these are standard across the board, except on that very base LS trim. What is also standard across the board on every new Trax is the My Chevrolet app. So you can lock, unlock, remote start, and check your fuel mileage remaining, so how much fuel you have left from that app. It's not really a necessity because you don't have phone as a key, so you can't just get in with your phone, start it, and drive away like you can with newer Toyota models or Teslas, but you do have the phone app if you want that functionality. You do have power adjust yet manual fold mirrors across the board. They all do have blind spot monitoring, and you do have black mirror skull caps on this active trim. The RS trims also have black skull caps as well. The LT and the LS trims have paint match skull caps. Up here you do have roof rails. These are standard on every trim except the LS trim, if I'm not mistaken. These particular ones are painted in this gunmetal gray metallic flake, and I believe the lower trim, so that would be the LT and the 1RS trim, just have black plastic roof rails, if I'm not mistaken. No sunroof up here. You do have a radio antenna for Sirius XM. It is not a shark fin. It does actually have a sticky uppy bit. I don't know what you want to really call that. Let's hop inside and talk about the interior. Hopping into the driver's seat of the 2026 Chevy Trax, the door handle actually feels pretty decent, and the door thunk, not too bad for a budget car. What is not the greatest thing in the world though is the door panel material. It's all hard, scratchy plastics. The door armrest is very hard and not padded at all. And the fit and finish is not great. It squeaks around quite a lot. But let's actually hop in here and talk about the interior quality itself. And it is on the cheaper side in here, but for the price you can't complain too much. And the fit and finish is on the creakier side, but then again, for the price you can't complain too much. Let's talk about the features. On the driver door, you do have automatic down windows. So all 4 do have express down, but not express up. You have your power mirror adjustment controls, your lock and unlock switch, you have your driver door pull. On this door panel, on the active trims, you do have stitching that represents the accent colors on the dash. This will change depending on which trim level you get. So if you get an LT trim, which has blue accents, these stitching will be blue. Down here in the door panel, you do have cubby storage for a water bottle and one of 6 speakers in this Chevy Trax Active. Let's take a listen to the sound system. All right, time for the sound system test. This is a 6-speaker audio system. The base model does have a 4-speaker audio system, but the one I'm testing here has the 6-speaker system. Got the house music loaded up because it's got bass treble and all that, so we can see what the sound system sounds like. Make sure the equalizer is reset. Reset the equalizer, reset the fade and balance. Let's go. Got me. My thoughts on the sound system, actually better than I was expecting. A lot of the GM 6-speaker systems don't sound as good as this, even though this should still be the same system. Now, this sound system seems to have a lot more clarity and bass than the Bolt sound system and the Equinox EV, and those were both 6-speaker sound systems. So this actually has a decent, very workable sound system. You can do a lot with the equalizer, and that makes it sound a lot better. I think this is probably how I would have it set up, just a little bit more in the mid-range, because it is a little bit flat sounding unless you do that. But overall, the sound system is not bad at all. The car just shut off because it was in accessory mode. Although I would not buy a car with the 4-speaker sound system. That probably sounds terrible. So welcome back from the sound system test. To the left of the steering wheel, you have your air vent, a switch for your headlights, your gauge cluster dimmer switch. Down here, you do obviously have your hood popper, your fuse box, and up here, you do have another one of those 6 speakers for your audio system. Up here on the dash, you do have a red LED projected onto the windshield to let the driver know that the collision avoidance system has been triggered and that you should probably hit the brakes instead of hitting whatever you were about to hit. In front of the steering wheel, you do have your 8-inch driver information display. This is available on the upper 3 trim levels. The lower 2 trim levels have an analog gauge cluster with a small TFT screen in the middle of the analog gauges for your information and stuff like that. The steering wheel itself is leather wrapped and heated. You have a little button on the steering wheel to turn on the heating. This is standard on the upper 2 trims, so that is 2RS and active. The LT trim has the leather wrapping, but I believe the heating is optional. And on the lower 2 trims, it has a urethane plastic steering wheel with no heating. The steering column itself is 4-way manual adjust, so you can go up and down and in and out to get your ideal driving position. The switches on the steering column, you do have your turn signal stock with the automatic bright toggle on there, and you do have your wiper control over here with your intermittent settings and your rear wiper control. These switches are actually from previous generation GM products. These are actually a little bit old school compared to what they're putting in the new vehicles, but they still work perfectly fine and there's nothing wrong with them. On the steering wheel, you do have your buttons for adaptive cruise control. Adaptive cruise is an option and the upper 3 trim levels have it, and I believe the lower 2 trim levels do not. Over here, you do have your controls for your TFT information display, your phone controls, and in the center, you do have the horn. That's not a great horn. It's only a single tone. It gets the job done for such a cheap vehicle. Moving to the center of the dash, you do have an 11-inch central infotainment screen with wireless Apple CarPlay and Android Auto across the board. You do have a built-in Wi-Fi hotspot, and on the lower 2 trim levels, this is actually an 8-inch display instead of this 11-inch screen. And the software on the smaller screens is actually the previous generation GM software from cars before about 2024. So that is interesting. The software is definitely different depending on which trim level you get, but the software on this particular screen is not the fastest thing in the world, but it gives you all the functionality you need, such as your tripometer, your Wi-Fi hotspot, Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, like I mentioned, are wireless, and your vehicle settings. It responds quickly enough. It's not the same system as other nicer GM vehicles, so this is not Android Automotive like the electric GM stuff, and that means that unlike those vehicles, this still does have Apple CarPlay. Below the screen, you do have 2 air vents, and to the left of those air vents, you do have your engine start-stop button. This is notable because the base model, the LS trim, actually has a keyed ignition, so you have to stick it in and twist it. Below that, you have your single-zone automatic climate controls. The lower 2 trims just have a manual climate control function and no automatic function. There is no option for dual-zone climate, unfortunately. You do have your heated seat controls. Heated seats are standard on the 2RS and active trims. I believe you can get them on the 1RS trim, but not on the Super Base LS this model. Below that, you have a cigarette style power outlet, a USB charge port, USB-A and USB-C as well. You have a cubby, no wireless charging, unfortunately. Right here, you have your button for your auto start stop, your lane departure avoidance, your shifter, which is actually a manual / physical shifter, your electronic parking brake, 2 cup holders, a slot to stick your cell phone, more cubby storage right here, a pretty deep center console with a padded armrest. You have a glove box over here, but it is not lockable. Gloss black trim on your dash and more accent colors on the dash. And this will actually change depending on which trim you get. If you get an LT trim, you'll get blue, RS will be red, and the active is some variation of yellow. The seats also do have this nice yellow piping and yellow stitching, and these are the ECOTEC leatherette seats. These seats are heated in the front. You cannot get ventilation in the Trax, unfortunately. The passenger seat is 4-way manual adjust, so you get forward and backward and backrest tilt. However, you cannot adjust the seat up and down on any Trax. The passenger seat does not have a height adjustment. The driver's seat is 8-way power adjust on the upper 3 trim levels. The lower 2 trim levels have a 6-way manual driver's seat, so at least you do have height adjustment on those trims. And this does have a power lumbar, although it is only in and out and not up and down. Moving up here, you do have your sun visors. They do not slide and they do not have vanity lighting, but at least you do get a mirror. In here, you do have a manually dimmable central mirror. You can obviously move it around like this. No rear camera mirror, unlike the Chevy Bolt, which is actually a fairly similarly priced vehicle. Up here, you do have your incandescent dome lights and what would be the switch for your optional sunroof. I believe you can get that on the Trax. And that's basically it for the interior on the Trax. It's fairly basic, but it offers basically every feature you could need at this price point. And for 27 grand for this fully loaded active trim, it has heated seats, Apple CarPlay, good functional AC, a leather wrapped heated steering wheel, and the seat is decently comfortable and the ergonomics are not bad at all, except for this very hard plasticky armrest, which is honestly the weakest part of this whole interior. Let's hop into the back and talk about the rear space. Hopping into the rear seat on the 2026 Trax, the driver's seat is set to my driving position, and being 6'2", I actually have a decent amount of room back here considering the size class the vehicle is in. This is in the subcompact crossover SUV segment, and I have a good amount of legroom, a good amount of headroom, and the seat is fairly comfortable, and the vehicle is wide enough so you can put someone in the central seat because the floor is completely flat. That is one of the benefits of not needing to offer all-wheel drive. The door panel is very basic, very similar to up front. You do have a little cubby down here, and that's basically it. You do have a grab handle up here with a coat hook, your incandescent dome lights, and that's basically it. You don't have rear air vents back here, but you do have 2 USB ports, and you don't have much else other than that. There's no central armrest, there's no heated rear seats, there's not even a driver's seat map pocket. The only other feature I can think of is that the rear headrest can fold down to improve rear visibility, but that's pretty much it. There's not much back here, and to be honest, there really doesn't need to be considering the price point. So if you're looking for a budget vehicle, this has got the space, and honestly, for $21,000 starting price, you can't really complain about it too much considering what this car offers. Let's move around to the trunk and talk about the cargo room. Before we hop around back, let's pop open this fuel door. This does have a capless fuel filler, and like I mentioned in the powertrain section of the video, this does only require 87 octane, and the MPG rating for this car is 28 in the city, 32 on the highway, and 30 miles per gallon combined for every trim. Despite which wheel package you get on the RS or the active trim, they all get the same miles per gallon, and with the 13.2 gallon fuel tank in this car, that should give you roughly a 370 mile range depending on conditions. So decent amount of range, decent sized fuel tank for the fuel efficiency of this vehicle. Not the biggest tank in the world, but it's also not the smallest. Let's move around to the rear and talk about the styling. Before we hop into the cargo area on the Chevy Trax, let's talk about the rear end styling. You do have these pretty good looking rear taillights, but they are completely incandescent. There is not a single LED bulb on the back of this car. You have incandescent combined stop and turn lamps, so no amber lights back here. Your reverse lights in the center. Up here you have an incandescent third brake light, your rear wiper, blacked out Chevy bow tie, license plate mounting holes, your active badge, your Trax badge, some parking sensors down here in the bumper, chrome trim. That's basically it. Very good looking rear end, but a very basic looking rear end. All right, let's open up the liftgate. The liftgate release button is right underneath the Chevy bow tie. And you do not have a power liftgate available on the Trax, but it does have these hydraulic gas struts, and the liftgate does actually open high enough to the point where I don't hit my head on it at 6'2". So that is actually really nice to see. You have a grab handle up here to close the liftgate, and that is pretty much it. Fairly basic, there's no lights in here or anything special, but it gets the job done. You do have an included cargo cover, that way people cannot see what you're carrying in the rear, and you can obviously remove this cargo cover by unhooking it right here and popping it out. Unfortunately, this does not fit under the floor, so you do have to leave this at home if you do remove it. And once you remove that rear parcel shelf, you do have 25.6 cubic feet of rear cargo space, so that is actually a lot larger than other vehicles in this segment, and that means you can carry around a lot of people and all their stuff in this car, which you can't say about a lot of other compact SUVs. If you need to, you can fold the seats down and get 54.1 cubic feet of cargo space with the seats folded down, and they do fold completely flat, so there is no lip right here, so you can just push your suitcases directly to the front, and that won't be a problem. You do have a fairly narrow opening here, since the back of the car does slope down a little bit more than some other hatchback style SUVs, but other than that, there's not really much to see back here other than an incandescent cargo light, and under the floor, you do obviously have your spare tire and your jack and all that stuff. But it is nice that this does include a spare tire, because not a lot of modern vehicles still do. Let's talk about some of the pricing and trim levels on the 2026 Trax. So let's talk about the pricing and trim levels on the 2026 Chevy Trax. If you go to the Chevrolet website, you will see that the Trax starts at $21,700. However, when you click into the build and price menu, you will see that the price jumps up. That's because it includes the roughly $1,750 destination charge in the building price inside the configurator, so you don't have to factor that in later. You'll see that you have the LS, the 1RS, the LT, the 2RS, and the active trim levels, and they are all front-wheel drive, as the Trax does not offer an all-wheel drive variant. Now, the differences between the trim levels are fairly superficial, but you can get different features depending on the trim. The base LS model has steel wheels, incandescent turn signals, and daytime running lights, a much cheaper interior with cloth seats, as well as a cheaper, smaller infotainment system, analog gauges, and a plastic urethane steering wheel. Now, the differences between these trim levels basically depend on what features you get. You can have adaptive cruise on the upper three trims, so that is LT, 2RS, and active. You have LED daytime running lights on the higher three trims, heated seats on the higher three trims, heated steering wheel on the higher three trims, etc., etc. Most of the trim levels in this vehicle are style packages, aka the RS and the active trim. The primary trims that you're going to be looking at here are the LS and the LT. Those are the real feature bumps in terms of trim levels, because you actually get the different technology between the two. And the LT trim, I think, is the best balance of value here, because you get the nice LED headlights, you get the updated screens on the interior, you get heated seats as an option, you get automatic climate control as an option, and you can obviously get the leather wrapped heated steering wheel in the LT trim. So basically, the LT has an equivalent level of tech to the upper two trim levels, except a lot of it is added in as an option rather than standard. And to me, the fact that the LT trim offers the 17-inch alloy rim makes it a little bit more of a great value buy, specifically because 17-inch tires are easier to find, and they are also going to improve the ride quality of this vehicle. Not to say that the 18-inch wheels on my active review sample were bad in terms of comfort, but the smaller 17-inch alloy wheel is definitely going to improve comfort. Obviously, like I mentioned, there are a bunch of different packages on the Chevy Trax. You have the Midnight Edition, the LT Convenience Package, the Sunroof Package, which also adds wireless charging, Driver Confidence Package that adds adaptive cruise, etc., etc. Most of the features that I mentioned in the review, as far as like adaptive cruise, sunroof, wireless charging, heated seats, etc., are all optional except on maybe the very upper trims, so that is 2RS and active. Most of the trims is going to be an option, and in fact, even on the fully loaded trims, it still is an option for a lot of those features, such as adaptive cruise control, but they're not super expensive to add in. For example, the Driver Confidence Package is only around $800, and I think for adaptive cruise, rear parking sensors, and rear cross traffic alert, that is not a lot of money to spend for some of those features, and all the features on this vehicle are very reasonably priced. So while there is not a ton of standard equipment, especially on that base LS model, I think the stuff that you can get on the Trax is very fairly priced and easy to come by. If you look near me in the matches near you section, you can see that there are some LS trims available for around 22 grand, and I have seen some active trim levels available for a pretty similar price, just below $24,000. Obviously, this is an edge case, but you can see that there are some pretty decent discounts on this vehicle if you want to get a couple grand off the price of a new Chevy Trax. Keep in mind, though, that you will have to get the higher trim levels to get the discount. Most of the lower trims don't have as much of a discount as of right now. Other than that, the pricing on the Trax is very reasonable. The options do not cost a lot, and the features that you get in each trim are pretty decent, so you can obviously step up and work your way up the ladder without spending a lot of extra money to get basic features like heated seats and stuff like that. Obviously, I think the best option in terms of feature set would be that LT trim, just because it's a nice balance of comfort options and available packages such as heated seats and stuff like that. But you obviously can get that LS base model if you want to save some money. There also is that 1RS trim if you want a little bit more style package, although personally I would skip that. And I think I would also skip the 2RS trim simply because I think the Active is probably the best looking out of all the Traxes with the slightly updated / different front end. And I think the cacti green paint color is a fantastic option. Speaking of which, let's go over those paint colors. On the base LS trim, if you go to the exterior, you have basically all the basic colors. You have gray, black, silver, and white, and you also have Apex Red and Marina Blue. If you go to the 1RS trim and the 2RS trim, I believe they share the same colors with the exception of the white sands color, which is kind of an off-white. On the LT trim, you also have basically the exact same colors as the base LS. On the 2RS trim, I believe the colors are shared with the 1RS trim. And on the active trim, you actually can get some pretty interesting colors, or at least you used to be able to. I thought they offered nitro yellow at some point, but you do have the option of cacti green, which I think is by far the best color option on the new Trax. No, I'm not biased at all. Why would I think that? Anyway, the cacti green on the Trax I think is honestly the color to go for, and I honestly would go for the active trim specifically for that color, just because it doesn't really cost anything more than an LT trim with all the options to make it equivalent to that active trim. So that was a fairly brief overview of the pricing and trim levels on the new Trax. And if you want to get the exact details for yourself, just go to the configurator. It's really easy to use, and this will give you a nice outline of all the features that come on certain trim levels. But if you were to ask me, I think the LT trim is the nice balance of cost to feature set. And if you obviously want the cool cacti green paint color, you can just step up to the active trim. It's not that much more for a comparable feature set, and I think it works perfectly fine. There's nothing in the active trim that really screws you over in terms of like, oh, I'm not getting this, or I'm spending too much on this particular feature. It's honestly one of the nicest looking vehicles in this compact crossover segment, and let's get this thing out on the road and see if the powertrain holds up to that. That was some pricing and trim levels on the 2026 Trax, and despite there being 5 trim levels, there actually is good value out of all of them. The LT trim does seem to be the best value play. It gets you the most features per dollar, but this fully loaded active trim maxing out at $27,000 still is good value for what you're getting. Let's take this thing out on the road and see how it drives. All right, let's hop into the 2026 Trax and take it for a spin, shall we? Open up the garage door, buckle my seatbelt, and we'll fire up the 3-cylinder. Turn up the AC. The AC does work very well in this car, just like every other GM vehicle. Backup camera is pretty high resolution, although it is a little bit warpy and it is not the highest FPS. It does have rear parking sensors. Pulling out of the garage, make sure I shut the door behind me, and let's see how the 2026 Chevy Trax drives. Admittedly, this is actually the second take because the first time I forgot to put the plates back on the car and I had to go straight back to the house. NVH on the gravel driveway, pretty good. Suspension's on the stiffer side, not too bad though. Signal sound, pretty quiet, different from the newer GM products, but pretty typical of like previous generation GM stuff. And the throttle response from the 3-cylinder is pretty decent. There is no sport mode, I think, at all on the Trax. Maybe the RS trims have a sport mode, but this active trim level doesn't have a sport mode. And this is kind of where that 3-cylinder struggles a little bit. Acceleration, I'm to the floor. There's 60. It gets out of the way, but it takes its time. It's not gonna win any races, but that's pretty much how all these cars in this segment are. None of them are really gonna break any records. If anything, this powertrain in daily driving is a lot more responsive than the naturally aspirated 4-cylinders of its competition. Let's do a timed 0 to 60 run. I have the draggy hooked up. Come to a complete stop. We'll give it a little brake torque. There's 40. There we go, 60, 10.54 seconds, not especially quick. And there's 85 mile an hour I let out of it. Quarter mile, 17:58. Not the quickest. It is hot out today. The density altitude is 3,400 feet. So I guess that is probably part of the reason why the 0 to 60 might have been slower than expected. But this thing is not quick. They say the 0 to 60 is anywhere from high 8s, so maybe like 8.9 seconds, to low 9s, maybe like 9.4, 9.3, 9.4. I just got 10.54. That is slightly uphill, and it is hot out today, and maybe I'm not supposed to brake torque it to get the best acceleration out of it. The point I'm trying to make here is that it's not fast at all. It's actually on the slower side as far as modern cars go, but if you can get past that, this powertrain is actually very smooth, very refined. It gets decent fuel economy. For the size of the vehicle, it's actually pretty good. And the initial tip-in acceleration is pretty good, but once you go full throttle, there's not a lot of power. Only 137 horsepower from this Chevy Trax, and it weighs 3,000 pounds, so it's not the lightest thing in the world. But compared to some of its competition, it's actually pretty on par. The Nissan Kicks has a little more power and weighs a little bit less, but the numbers may make it seem a little bit different because obviously this engine is turbocharged and the Kicks is not turbocharged. So this is actually going to do a lot better if you live somewhere like Colorado at high elevation, because the turbo is going to aid the engine at those high elevations. NVH at 63 mile an hour, pretty quiet, not a ton of tire noise. Obviously there is some, and there's not a ton of wind noise either. Obviously there is still some wind noise, but it's not an egregious amount, and it's actually perfectly fine at these lower speeds. In fact, it's actually better than the Chevy Bolt. The Chevy Bolt is the vehicle that I reviewed previously on the channel, and it's a little bit more noisy than this on the interior. Overall, this is just fine, and for a $21,000 vehicle, obviously that's the starting price, the NVH is perfectly acceptable, other than maybe some creaks and rattles over really coarse pavement. I have noticed that, but basically anything that's going to be under $40,000 will do that to some extent, so it's not out of the ordinary. Ooh, a Saturn Sky. Let's pull into this gas station and test out the turning radius. I'm gonna go all the way to the edge of the asphalt right here, and then I'm gonna crank the wheel and see what the turning radius is like. And it's fairly tight. Not too bad, actually pretty decent. For the size of the car, it's pretty good. I'll put the actual official turning radius figure down here with a little text just to let you guys know what the actual number is. But as far as the turning radius feel in the real world, it's pretty tight and it gets the job done. Coming to a stop, I would have thought that the auto start stop would have engaged there, but it has not. There is some scenarios where auto start stop is a little bit hesitant to engage. I think that's a good thing, but then there's also scenarios where it engages too frequently, and I feel like that's also a bad thing. I'm just tipping into the throttle right now, and it's actually got pretty good acceleration on initial tip-in. It's just there's not a ton when you floor it. For a daily driver, and especially for someone like my grandma who never floors it, 60. I need to turn that off. Oh my God. There we go. But this powertrain for someone like my grandma who never floors it is actually perfectly fine. And the top speed is actually not super bad or anything. It's like 115 mile an hour. I'm actually surprised it can get going that fast, because you saw right there during the acceleration test, like I got up to 85 and I was wide open for like 20 seconds. So it must take forever to get going that quickly. Maybe at lower elevation density slash a cooler day at the same elevation, it would probably be a little bit quicker. But that's just kind of the thing with small displacement engines like this. You're just not gonna get a bunch of acceleration out of them. Then again, I'm cruising right now at 2,000 RPM. I don't hear or feel the engine at all. There's no vibration in the cabin. There's no noise pumped in from the speakers or anything like that. It's super quiet from a powertrain perspective, and it's really refined, and no other vehicle at this price point quite gets there. The Hyundai Venue is pretty noisy as far as powertrain goes. Same goes with the Nissan Kicks, and obviously those vehicles have CVT, so they're gonna drone a little bit more than the 6-speed automatic would in this vehicle. Obviously the transmission itself doesn't make noise, but you know, you get what I mean. Let's go around this corner at 64 mile an hour. And those wide tires, relatively speaking, actually do a great job of holding the road. And the torsion beam rear suspension does a good job of keeping body roll to a minimum. The steering is electronically assisted, and it is also very numb. There's basically no steering feel in the wheel. It does weight up a little bit in the corner, but as far as road texture, there's basically nothing that comes through the steering wheel, which is to be expected in a vehicle in this class. Coming up to a corner, let's test the cornering capabilities around 60 mile an hour. Pretty good there, held its line perfectly fine. That was to the floor right there. Even then, I was on the floor and you barely hear the powertrain. But the noise that does come through is very pleasant because it's a 3-cylinder. It's not a coarse sounding 4-cylinder. And that alone just makes this car appeal to me more than a Nissan Kicks or a Hyundai Venue. Because those vehicles have pretty loud 4-cylinders, and there's nothing wrong with that inherently speaking, but it's just something to keep in mind. Let's try out the adaptive cruise control system. So this does have adaptive cruise, I believe, on the upper 3 trims, but this does have adaptive cruise, and it does have 3 following distances like other GM cars. And I believe the cruise control can go up to like 100 miles an hour, which is ridiculous. Overall, the adaptive cruise works great. No lane centering or anything available in the Trax, but for this price point, I would not expect anything like that. But the technology in here, the CarPlay works pretty good, the wireless CarPlay. Everything in here works perfectly fine, except for the other day I had a weird glitch where I turned the car off and then I turned it back on and it put itself in metric units. So it put the speed and stuff in kilometers. And then I went to go change it in the menu, but the option for the US units had disappeared until I turned the car off and back on again. That was a weird software bug. But so far, that's the only issue I've had with it. This is a pretty sharp corner right here, so we'll see what it's like. No tire squeal. I wasn't going that quickly because there's this Camry in front of me, but the tires are honestly kind of oversized. I mean, it's not a bad thing, but it doesn't need this much tire. And the fact that the RS trim has even, or sorry, the 2 RS trim has even wider tires than this, that doesn't make much sense to me. I don't know why they put such a wide tire on this car. One thing I do notice is around 25 mile an hour under like medium to hard throttle, there is a slight shake in the front end. I don't know if that has to do with the unequal length half shafts that most gas cars have or what, but you wouldn't notice it if you weren't looking for it, but I thought it was, might as well point it out. If this thing just had a little bit more power, then it would be perfect, but it's just a little bit too slow. I think if they would have put the 1.3 liter 3-cylinder from the Trailblazer in here, which has a little bit more power, that's closer to like 160 horsepower compared to like 137 in this one, that would make a huge difference, I think, just in the overall acceleration. The Trailblazer does also have that 9-speed automatic, so that might also help with acceleration a considerable amount. Put it into manual mode or low. So you can shift with low. There is buttons on the side of the shifter. You can shift through the gears on that 6-speed automatic. Because like I mentioned, most of the cars in this segment are CVT. And so having something with a physical automatic is kind of nice. It gives me some peace of mind in terms of reliability down the road. Let's let this truck get a little bit further out of the way here. Test the turning radius again. Didn't quite make it there. Have to back up. The only time you really do hear the engine in this car is at low speed. Like right now with my foot on the brake, I can feel the 3-cylinder a little bit, but let's pull out here. It almost seems like between 3/4 and full throttle, there's no change, it seems like to me. It goes, not very fast, but it goes. I don't want to say it's underwhelming because it's to be expected. In a car at this price and in this segment, none of them are really all that fast. In daily driving, the 3-cylinder actually does do pretty well. I'm not trying to make it seem like it's the end of the world that it only has 137 horsepower. If you enjoy driving fast, this is not the car for you. But for the majority of people, the 3-cylinder's got plenty of pep, And it's not like it's unresponsive. Like, you put your foot in it and it responds pretty quickly. There's not a ton of turbo lag or anything like that. And if you actually pay attention, you can actually hear some blow-off noises from the turbocharger. So that is actually pretty surprising, considering that this is pretty much just an economy car, just a little bit taller than what we usually think of as an economy car. It's honestly more of a lifted hatchback. It's a stilted hatchback, but they call it a crossover. In my mind, this is a car. It's a car for people who want fuel efficient, comfortable, reliable transportation for a very low price. And it checks all those boxes, and it does it in style with a pretty decent interior, other than this rock hard armrest, which definitely hurts my elbow after a while. But that's really my only complaint with the interior in here, other than maybe fit and finish. And surprisingly, the seats are a lot more comfortable than other GM cars. I will give them credit for that. Basically equally as comfortable as the Equinox EV seats, and that's a lot more expensive than this. Now, I cannot attest to the lower trim seats, which are cloth, but they should still be the same design, so the comfort should be fairly similar to these leather seats, or ECOTECs, whatever you want to call them. See, that's like half throttle right there, and it actually does have, like I mentioned, plenty of get up and go when you're not flooring it. Which is, it's good that they tuned the throttle pedal to kind of get around the weakness of the engine in a way. Because, you know, like with underpowered cars from even like 10 years ago, when you'd want to pass someone, you'd have to really floor it in order to get power out of the engine. You have to rev it really hard. This is not like that. This has a really low peak torque. It's like 162 pound-feet, but it's at 2,500 RPM. So if you need to just pull out in front of someone, you don't have to floor it, unless if you're merging onto a fast interstate. And then at that point, you might as well push the pedal through the floor, because there's not enough power for me. But for the target buyer, I think it's fine. It's just interesting that they chose a 3-cylinder, because the previous generation Trax had a 1.4 liter 4-cylinder turbo, and that actually made a lot more power, or at least a decent amount more power than this. So I'm confused that they went to a 3-cylinder instead of just making a new iteration of the 1.4, or use the 1.5 turbo from the Equinox. But then again, I wouldn't say the powertrain in this car is a reason not to buy it, and actually I would say it is a reason to buy it if you value comfort, quietness, fuel efficiency, and smoothness, because this powertrain in those aspects is fantastic for the price of the car, and relative to its competitors, it's just so smooth. The only time where it's not so smooth is at idle, but then again, it's a 3-cylinder. It's doing all it can. I'm not gonna slam on the brakes here, but I am gonna push them. You can see it is pretty sensitive. The brake pedal is the only thing that I think could have been tuned a little differently. I wish it had a little bit more linearity to because I'm just tapping the brake right there, and you can see it's the brakes work well in this car. It's just not the best tuning from the pedal. It's not bad. If you get used to it, it's not gonna matter at all. All right, that's gonna be the end of the drive on the 2026 Chevy Trax. Let's cut back to the studio and give you guys my final thoughts. All right, so that was my impressions driving the Chevy Trax. And while it's not the fastest thing in the world, the 3-cylinder engine does make quite an interesting sound, and the handling is actually surprisingly good for a vehicle in this class. It goes around corners pretty well because of those wide tires. The comfort is pretty good. The suspension is on the stiffer side, but overall, the package here for the price, if you're not gonna go electric and get a Chevy Bolt, this is the best value new Chevy you can buy, and it's also the cheapest. Thank you guys for watching this review. Comment down below what you guys think of the 2026 Chevy Trax, and I'll see you in the next video.